I'm Jessica Anne Pressler, and you've tuned into Your Traitor Within, a podcast that exposes the brutal truths of healing, self-discovery, and breaking free from relentless patterns of self-sabotage. Today's guest is Caroline Strawson, an award-winning nervous system expert, speaker, and Hay House author with over 500,000 followers across social media. Caroline rebuilt her life after surviving domestic abuse, coercive control, homelessness, and over $90,000 in debt. Diagnosed with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and panic attacks, she discovered that traditional top-down approaches to mental health weren't enough. And feeling let down by the very systems that were meant to help her, she built her own. By looking how the nervous system plays a big role in both mental and physical health, Caroline developed a powerful approach that helps people move out of functional freeze by building true nervous system capacity rather than waiting for life to feel calm on its own. Through her work, she shares practical embodied tools that empower people to stop surviving and start creating a future rooted in safety, choice, and resilience. Caroline, you are a true inspiration. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge, and for sharing your Traitor Within story with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to it.
So when we talk about, what wasn't out there for us and how you made, and all that you do, and I want to say that, I've talked about this before. I've been a psychotherapist for almost 40 years. I didn't learn about narcissism. I didn't learn about, it was always traditional. I did believe that you do go back in childhood, you do learn from your childhood. And I know that we've gotten away from that and back and forth over the years. But we certainly did not talk a lot about the body. We didn't talk about this, the somatic piece. We didn't talk about, we talked about our childhood, and that was important, but we didn't learn about, the trigger responses, and we certainly didn't learn about narcissism. And I want to say that you were one of the first people that I learned about this stuff. And I actually want to say here that you have this course, many courses actually, and a Facebook group, which we'll talk about later, that I took part in years ago. I didn't do it to get a coaching certificate. I did it to just learn and to increase my knowledge so that I could help everyone out there. So thank you for that.
Oh, I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Often when we've gone through something like that, we don't want anybody else to suffer. And I think what's so beautiful about our community is it is, learning for ourselves and then creating that ripple effect as well
Mhm.
and reaching others that I alone couldn't do.
Right, exactly. Because I, like you, came up with the Trader Within concept, which was to do that. It came out of trying to learn about myself. And then we take that and we give it to a bigger community.
Absolutely. And I love that because I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? We live in a pretty angry world and very judgmental. And, the more support we can give each other and help, I just think that that's got to be a good thing in this day and age.
Now, I love our community. We are all
Yeah.
helping each other help others.
Absolutely. And I think, and also if you're around that kind of environment, it doesn't just feel like you're looking at the news or looking on social media and it feels like, oh, it feels like this never ending gloom and doom. And of course, there is pain out there, but there's some wonderful things out there as well and a whole life for us to be living.
Mhm. And one thing I love about what you do is it's not just about learning about what's going on in the world and learning what's going on in your individual world. It's about empowering ourselves to make change. We can
Yeah.
never change another, but we
Oh
can
my
work on ourselves and we can learn about ourselves. And yes, it does create sometimes pain because learning about your childhood, learning about your trauma, speaking out loud about your trauma, but then eventually it takes away the shame.
It
And
does.
part of
I
that,
think a lot of that, yeah, I know certainly from my perspective with that, I spent a lot of my life, if I'm honest, expecting
Mhm.
other people to
Mhm.
make me feel better. Not in a
Mhm.
way where I sat there and thought, you need to make me feel better, but in a
Mhm.
way that I'd never learned and never been shown in my own childhood that actually my own happiness, my own sense of regulation was in my hands. I was learned it was very externalized. It was very transactional that if I was to feel a certain way, I needed someone else to act or behave in a certain way for that to happen. I didn't realize it was innate within me It was, I was a human doing to get someone else to say or be something
Mhm.
for me, and then I could go back to feeling a certain way. So, yeah, absolutely. That ownership and responsibility piece can feel quite hard, I think, when we realize that, because if we've been brought up where it has been others, to then suddenly hold a mirror up to ourselves can be quite confronting for many of us.
Right. The best thing a parent can do is create a safe environment so a child could be themselves and feel safe enough to be themselves and safe enough to learn.
Correct.
By,
To
some of it
form.
trial and error, right, about what makes them feel better, to self-soothe, to love
Absolutely.
themselves. And when you say to a child, you can say, I'm proud of you, but to also say, do you feel proud of yourself?
Absolutely. And even now, my kids are now 18 and 21, but as they were growing up, whenever I said I'm proud of you, I was very conscious that I'm proud of you. I'm not proud of your straight A's. I'm not proud of your 10 out of 10 on a spelling test.
Mhm.
I'm proud of you, simply you, full
Mhm.
stop. I
So
didn't
important.
want my children to feel like I'm only proud of them if they did something. Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's I was not
Oh,
brought up like that. So it was really important for me to show them how proud I am of them just for breathing, just for being themselves,
right.
because just for being themselves is good enough beyond anything.
It's a huge difference. And it's, maybe to some others that aren't yet understanding this, but it's a huge difference.
It is. It really is. It's tweaks in how we share that with our children. And it's not, you're a angry person or you are naughty.
Mhm.
It's that behavior or that part of you. It's,
Mhm.
no person is innately bad ever. There is a reason for that. And the language we use can help separate that out. So it doesn't excuse behavior as well,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
means we can separate the behavior from the person.
Just like whatever trauma we may have is just a part of us. Just
Absolutely.
like the traitor within is just a part of us and a part of us that wants to protect us. It just doesn't always
Correct.
know how. And it's about
Absolutely.
loving these different parts.
Yeah, because there's no bad parts of us, as Dick Schwartz would say,
Right.
that every part has that loving intention for us, albeit sometimes a very destructive impact and how that is
Mhm.
received by the outside world.
But intention is usually good.
Correct. Intention is always good for the individual. Always.
Right. We just don't always know how.
Correct.
So what you do is you teach people how.
Absolutely. It's helping them recognize, where we feel the shame sometimes about those parts of us that might be showing up that we're completely blended with, that other people might be judging or saying to us, that
Mhm.
understanding that part of us is there for a reason for us, because as human beings, our primary role is survival and to move away from pain. So, however we are showing up is because it's our nervous system's belief that if we show up like that, it will minimize usually emotional and internal pain for us.
Mhm.
Because, of course, if we were being attacked or something physical was happening in that moment, our nervous system would completely take over anyway.
Mhm.
But we're very often, it's about that emotional pain, not feeling worthless or not feeling not good enough or we don't matter. And those parts are usually trying to distract and soothe us away from feeling that.
Mhm. And I know with myself and a lot of others, a lot of times you're trying to not feel abandoned. A lot of it goes into the feelings as a child of not feeling safe and fear of abandonment. So you do everything you can not to have it, even if it hurts you.
Absolutely. I know certainly for me, those wounded parts of myself, it's kind of evolved and changed over the years. It was definitely an I'm not good enough part to I'm unlovable. And probably
Mhm.
now, which I still work on, is that I don't matter. So if someone doesn't listen to me, for instance, I can feel that little girl inside of me feeling really rejected. And then I can
Mhm.
feel parts of me coming up trying to soothe that little girl. And on the
Mhm.
whole, now I've got the capacity to hold all of that and still show up in self energy. But
Mhm.
very often, sometimes it might blend with me and I might shout at
Mhm.
my husband or,
Mhm.
feel frustrated as such. And, that's that capacity piece to hold all parts of us in that moment, but still stay in that self energy.
And I want people to understand that it's still with you. These parts are
Yeah.
still with you. But it doesn't mean that, if you had now that you have awareness and you're mindful of it, then you could say, and if it pops up, when I've done marital therapy or couples therapy, it's about each other recognizing that we do have these parts and that it's not
Yeah.
personal necessarily to that
It's
person.
It's never personal. I think even when we talk about narcissism as such, and a narcissist, the primary role of a narcissist is to not feel their own pain, their own
Correct.
wounds.
Right.
The problem being then is their projection of their pain is
Mhm.
how do we receive that if we end up in that relationship as well.
Mhm.
And many of us who end up in relationships like that receive it in this is happening because I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy enough for this person. That's
Mhm.
our interpretation of the narcissist's say projection of their pain. But actually that's not true. That all of us, every single one of us, however our behavior shows up, whatever parts we are blended with, is because it's trying to do the best for us as an individual,
Mhm.
always. And I think certainly when I learned this work, it really enabled me to see myself very differently, but
Mhm.
also see other people very differently, rather than looking directly at how dare they be like this or gosh, their
Mhm.
behavior is like that. It allowed me to get curious about what happened to them for them to show up
Mhm.
like this and project their pain outwardly in that form.
Exactly. And I know people have not always been happy with this, but I do have empathy toward a narcissist as well because they have their pain. They are doing exactly what you said. And this is how they're surviving. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean anyone should be in a relationship with them.
Correct. And I think this is where parts work becomes really beautiful, actually, with certainly how I see narcissists too.
Mhm.
Whenever I think of a narcissist, because they're not born that way, there's no scientific research to suggest that they're born like this. It comes from childhood as well and their interpretation of their own external environment. And you might say, well, you might have two people involved in the same household. One could become codependent and the other could become a narcissist. Now,
Mhm.
narcissists are also codependent as well because they have a real lack of self, their lack
Mhm.
of self-love. The difference being is they have a similar core wound, but the parts that then show up to distract and soothe away from their core wound, I like to think of, say, a codependence protector parts would be things like people pleasing,
Mhm.
perfectionism,
Mhm.
procrastination, for instance. That's how their nervous system has evolved to distract and minimize what their pain is around feeling worthless. Whereas a narcissist, that we would label the collection of their protector parts is things like gaslighting, manipulation, very often sometimes addictions,
Mhm.
coercive control, anger. They can come up over a period of time. So I always like to think of the word narcissist as really a collective term we give to a wounded individual who is exerting certain protectors over a period of time that are more destructive, more abusive, more, controlling like that. And then the codependent, so really codependent and narcissist for me are really terms we would use to collectively describe somebody's almost army of protectors that are there for them as an individual. But it's very
Mhm.
descriptive for people. And certainly the word narcissist isn't for anyone else other than maybe the survivor to understand, okay,
Mhm.
that's what's happening.
Right.
But then that means they're never going to heal because a narcissist system is so locked down. You can never
Mhm.
get past to work with their wounded younger part of them. So they're
Mhm.
never going to show up as
Mhm.
themselves. It's a completely locked down system, sadly, not because we wouldn't want to, but
No, of
because
course.
there's no evidence to suggest you can do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. As again, as a therapist, it's sad. It's sad
It
because
is. It's incredibly sad. It really, really is. And I think that's what brings up maybe so much division around that as well, because people will
Mhm.
say, well, do they have a diagnosis and that? But, to get a diagnosis, you have to have someone who acknowledges they need to go and get a diagnosis. And by
Right.
nature of narcissism, they're never ever going to do that.
I think it's like 1% or 1.5% or
It is.
something actually walk into it because you'd have to have insight. But you'd have to most importantly be able to uh, get rid of that shield and
Correct. I'd be
and
really interested to know actually the stats on those who have been diagnosed. Were they actually diagnosed from one person, one time saying,
mm,
I think there's something wrong walking in, or was it discovered? Because it was
mm,
discovered with me and my ex. It was discovered because we were both in marriage counseling, and it
mm,
happened. And the counselor used to be a psychotherapist as
mm,
well. And
mm,
he happened to recognize the traits there. But it
mm,
wasn't like my ex-husband went in and went, I think
mm,
I'm a narcissist or anything. It was nothing like that. It happened to be because of the circumstantial piece of all of that. For
mhm,
that then to be,
mhm,
I remember he said to me, go and Google narcissistic sociopath. And it was like light bulb, light bulb, light
mhm.
bulb as such. But had I not known that, I would never have looked into that.
Interesting. Yeah. Yes. I think it's if someone would walk in the door, it would have to be only because their life was so distraught by their
Exactly.
traits, not knowing it yet, and then a therapist says it. But even for them to stay in therapy and tolerate looking into their
Right.
true self is like impossible for them. It's a
Right.
total,
I
complete,
know.
you know,
It
so.
really is. And that's again, I agree with you. It's incredibly sad. And that's not excusing abusive behavior.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
we can still explain and understand without excusing it as well.
Mhm. So, a little bit about the traitor within, which so you have a person who has a traitor that comes in. The narcissist is going to understand what that traitor within is and use it against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when they will weaponize your own core wounds and
Mhm.
everything like that too. And I think this is what makes it so interesting around the whole concept of this, because, you know, all of us all of the time are just trying to do the best we can. And it's how does that manifest in our actions, in our behavior, our traitor within, and how does that show up for us?
Hmm. No, it's true. So tell me, if you don't mind, a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so my bizarrely, my background was I was a podiatrist. That's where my background started. I was a podiatrist, very traditional upbringing in, you get your all your exams, your academics. I was very sporty as well. And I always thought I'd had an incredible childhood. I didn't think anything wrong with my childhood whatsoever. I always knew my dad could probably be a bit angry, and sometimes I'd be a little bit fearful of his temper and what mood he was in. But that was normal. That was my version of normal growing up. My mum was incredibly maternal. Her whole life revolved around being a mum, which, of course, for me as a child was great because that meant I'd got a really loving mother at home. Um, but all of that, little did I know, really shaped then what I
Mhm.
felt about myself and the relationships that I started to attract. And I got married in 1999 to my then ex-husband. There were already issues before all of that when I look back. And even on my wedding day, I remember thinking, should I be doing this? But of course, everybody was there. I didn't want to let anybody down. And we got married, we had our first child. And I'd probably say for me, when we had our first child, that's when I really started to notice some behavioral changes. And I
Mhm.
realized it's because my focus wasn't on him. It was obviously on our child
Mhm.
together. He
Mhm.
worked away from home a lot. He worked as cabin crew for a major airline. So he was away almost half of the time. And I ended up giving up work. And from what I can see now, over those periods of time, it was this slow chipping away at who I was, but without
Mhm.
seeing it. It wasn't like a light switch from one day to the next. It was a very slow chipping away about myself.
Mhm.
And when we then decided to try for a second child, I had four miscarriages in between that, and then I fell pregnant with our daughter. And then when my daughter was 1 years old, well, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I found out he was having an affair. And of course, that was, I was 6 months pregnant. I'd found out he was having an affair. And of course, he cried and said I'd never do it again. And, what was I meant to do with that information? So I stayed because we'd got a home and a family and a son, and I was pregnant with our daughter. Then when I had my daughter, again, it really felt at this point we were existing together. But
Mhm.
I'd been brought up on Disney fairy tales, you stay together no matter what.
Mhm.
And a year after my daughter was born, my mum passed away very, very suddenly as well. And she was like my best friend, my rock. So it was a real shock. So I was dealing with having a 1 year old, losing my mum, knowing my relationship wasn't right, still parenting our son at the same time. And I was very much just in doing mode, being a mum. That was my life. My life was being a mum. That's where I got my sense of worth. And then when our daughter was 3 years old, again, I was literally a shell of myself, grey baggy clothes, black clothes, didn't want to be seen. I'd put on weight, just felt ugly, fat, disgusting. He'd had one affair. I started to suspect others. There was a lot of gaslighting that was happening. I was asking questions, getting shut down, so I just wouldn't ask anything in the end. I was really a shell of myself in all of this. I wasn't working. I didn't really have many friends because, he was away a lot. So I was literally a stay-at-home mum, basically. And I even remember thinking at the time, you know, this is my life now. This is it. This is it. This is just my life with my kids. Get them to 18. Don't know what happens beyond that, but that's
Mhm.
my role. That was my sense of worth. And then when my daughter was 3 and my son was 6, my husband obviously found somebody else and he left. And when he left, it was I still didn't realize it was an abusive relationship because I didn't have any broken bones or bruises or anything else. I didn't realize, but we had marriage counseling. And when he left, I was still having marriage counseling. I carried on seeing who I was seeing. And like I said, he used to be a psychotherapist as well. And I couldn't understand why my ex-husband wasn't apologetic about what had happened. It was almost like it was my fault, and I couldn't get my head around why he couldn't see what his behavior had been. And this was before I even knew the sorts of behavior as such. And I remember my psychotherapist putting his hands on my shoulders and saying, he's never going to apologize. Stop waiting for an apology. That's never going to come. And go and Google narcissistic sociopath. So I remember going home and Googling this, and it was like this light bulb going off for me because it made sense. I didn't realize. And I also saw somebody else and a counselor at our local healthcare provider too. So I was trying to feel better. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I now know that would have been complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, pretty much daily panic attacks, self-harming. Beyond all of that, years later, the physical illnesses came. I had a heart condition, metabolic disorder, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, IBS. Didn't connect them all together as such. I thought these were standalone diagnoses as such. I didn't realize everything was connected. But when my ex-husband left, I was so scared because I was thinking, how am I going to afford to be? I'd given up work. I'd given it up. So I started to do my podiatry again, just one day a week, running a clinic and doing home visits so I could still be there for my children as much as I possibly could because he'd moved hours away. And the money coming in didn't equal the money going out. I realized we were in over $90,000 worth of debt. And then in April of 2013, we were made homeless. Myself and my two children, we lost our family home. So I felt really at rock bottom that year. I hit 40 in 2013. And I remember in the June of that year, I remember literally sitting there thinking, goodness me, my life, this was not the plan. This was not the plan as a single mum. I was then rented in a tiny 3-bedroom terraced house. This wasn't the plan when I was younger to be in this situation. And I remember sitting there thinking, because I was really angry one minute, didn't want to get out of bed the next, this emotional roller coaster, but still showing up for my kids. I still had to be there for them. And thank goodness, because I probably wouldn't be here today had I not got children.
I understand.
And I remember at that time, I remember literally sitting there around my 40th birthday thinking, I can either keep going down this route, blaming everybody else, expecting other people to fix what situation I was in and keep waiting for someone to do that, or do it myself. And luckily for me, I thought I need to do this for myself and my children. I didn't know how. I didn't know what, because I'd also been trying the traditional methods of supporting myself, like the counseling. And it wasn't that it wasn't helpful, because I was being very validated in what I'd experienced. The problem being, when I was out of those sessions and a trigger happened, I would spiral again, and I was drinking too much. I was emotionally eating, feeling a lot of shame around the self-harm. So there was a lot of behaviors that I was doing that I felt a huge amount of shame about. And every day I'd think, I'm not doing that today. And then invariably by the end of the day, I had. So I felt like I was weak. I felt a failure. I felt like I was stupid. And I thought, what is wrong with me? I'm doing everything you're meant to do. So why is it I'm not really feeling any better? And again, as a scientist, as a medical professional, I started to do some research and thought, I can't be the only one feeling like this. Surely not. I'm an intelligent woman. Surely not. So I started to do some research, and I realized there's a really missing piece around mental health and physical health, and that was around the nervous system. And I became really fascinated with it, and, watched everything. And actually, I ended up completely retraining in what I now do. So an array of somatic modalities, such as somatic experiencing, internal family systems, EMDR, brain spotting, hypnotherapy. I did a postgrad in applied positive psychology because I didn't want people to just bounce back. I wanted, to create people that thrived and flourished in their life as well. And at the time, then I just started to build a business around it, doing one-to-ones. And then that evolved into doing group work because I became very busy. And then as I was teaching them, they said, we want to help as well. We want to create a more of a ripple effect. So I thought, okay, I'll create some, trainings and certifications around that, which I did. And then they started going off in the world. And then some of them didn't know how to build a business. And I felt very blessed. I think I was born with some entrepreneurship genes as well, which was very stifled as a child from an academic perspective, but seemed to be coming through more and more. So then I built the Mental Wellbeing Company, which is a franchise and license where we train people and then teach them how to build a business to help other people. And then also I have another business as I was building my own team. I've got 19 team in my business now as well. And of course, that brings its own challenges with 19 different nervous systems. So Tidal was born, which is about, trauma-informed development and learning in the workplace. So the three businesses that I have all organically, naturally evolved from really just wanting to make a difference in the world through the training I have. And like you said at the start, the system I felt let me down. So I wanted to build a new system where I could help other people in whatever, if I can help just one person, because I was stuck for a good few years, feeling angry, blaming everybody else. Whereas actually what, I wanted to do was take back my own power, because you cannot control what anyone else does, says, is anything. But I hadn't been taught that. I did a lot of reflection on my own childhood as well. And whilst I still think I was very lucky. I still did have a good childhood. I was fed, I was clothed, I was loved. But that element of love was very different with my mother. Her only sense of worth was being a mother. So I was definitely morphing into my mum. She had very severe rheumatoid arthritis, which again, from her childhood, she got it in her early 30s and being married to my father. My father is very toxic from his childhood as well. So I had one side where my mum was very loving, but got her sense from being a mum. And I was the youngest of three girls. So it was almost like I almost had to stay childlike. So my mum still had a role on the planet. And then with my father, it was very much like never praised, never said, I love you. And my interpretation was, I'm not doing enough. Now, that served me well in that I became a very high achieving perfectionist people pleaser. And I did very well at whatever I put my hand to, but to the point of exhaustion, really, because the intention was not just to do it, it was to get something back if I did it. And that as well. So both my mother and father, through their own wounds and their, the generational cycle of that, I feel very much like I've broken that with my own children. And, which is why I think I really struggled when my mum passed away, because it was almost like I was still like a child to my mum. So it was all of a sudden my safe adult, even though I was an adult, suddenly had gone. And then I'm also then dealing with a divorce and debt and losing my home and not really having anyone to help me. So it felt very lonely in the world. So, but I feel very blessed I went through that, because I feel like what I do right now is exactly where I'm meant to be, to help other people and to educate, to hopefully inspire of what is possible. Because I know for a long time I felt like my life was over. I felt like he's had the best years of my life and that's it now and stuff. So yeah, I feel really blessed to where I am, and that real internal reflection of the parts of me that I felt a huge amount of shame about: drinking, emotional eating, self-harm, dissociation, anger, pain. I now understand with such compassion. They were all there trying to help and support me. They really were. And I feel very lucky that I have a very robust system that wants to help and support me at any stage.
Did you ever go through a grieving process?
Yeah, I think not initially, if I'm honest. So, a lot of the work I do around the somatic side of things and completion of response cycles. When my mum passed away, and I remember it like yesterday. So I was kind of in our lounge in our house at the time, and my son, we were watching The Prince of Egypt on Disney. My daughter was upstairs asleep. My husband had gone off to work. He was flying to Boston that day. And I saw my father walk across the window, and he looked very stooped down. Now, bear in mind, my grandmother was still alive at this time as well. My grandmother at the time was in her 80s and that. So we kind of knew at some point we'd get that. But I saw my father walk around. He walked in our house. He normally just walked in without knocking. And I remember I was stood in the hallway with him, facing directly. I'd got my son at the side because he was like, "Oh, grandpa." And my dad just looked at me and said, "It's your mum. She's dead." And I was a bit like, "What?"
Oh,
And he said, "It's your mum. She's dead." And at the time, because my dad had given me that information, I went into, have you told my sisters? No. Okay, come and sit down. And I went into doing mode. I
right.
went into, okay, what needs doing? What needs to
Right.
happen right now? But
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, again, from a somatic perspective, the woman who hit the wall being given that news was still stuck and frozen there for a good few years. I
Mm-hmm.
was very much looking after my father, still looking after my children. Then the following year, myself and my husband split up. So at some point, down the line when I was doing my own work with this, I needed to go back to the woman that was frozen in shock against the wall and do some
Mm-hmm.
work around her and have a completion of that response cycle to settle my nervous system through
Mm-hmm.
that sense of grief as well, because it was definitely bubbling away. And I probably would say it probably took me a good 4 to 5 years to do that.
So, what do you say to a person that comes to you and says, I can't imagine going through the years of work I may have to do to get
Yeah. I think we should never think about things like this as destinations. There
there?
is no magical destination where we're going to wake up one day and go, "Oh, I'm healed, I'm calm, I'm at peace." It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen. I had a mentor say to me once, that each and every day is just the beginning, because
Mm-hmm.
then we're not judging ourselves on yesterday or where we think we should be. All we're working with is the flexibility of our own nervous system with compassion about what we didn't know at the time.
Right.
And, we can all look back and think, "Oh, I should have done it like this." But actually, you didn't do it like that because you didn't know that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, for people who think, "God, I don't want to go through all of those years," it's because then you're thinking those years are going to give you a magical destination. And that's not going to happen. You know what? When we're working with trauma, we're working with what is. What is in the here and now? What do you feel? What do you notice? What parts of you are coming up? And we work with that. And all of that time, then we're building capacity because we can never erase what we've experienced or what has happened. But what we absolutely can do is work on the somatic memory and experience of our interpretation of what has happened. These things happen to us, never because of us. But as children, we perceive it's because of us. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that, yes, that is doing the work. But I always think it's kind of two pathways we go down. We're navigating the symptoms of all of the things we've experienced. So we're learning nervous system regulation techniques. We're learning how to, when I feel activated or shut down, what can I do in those moments to put a little bit of energy back in the body or to discharge some of that wired energy that we might have. That's the symptom management piece. The curiosity is, why is someone in freeze or why is someone in fight flight? And that's where the completion of those response cycles then come in, almost to timestamps people's experience into the past. So they don't only know things weren't their fault or, they were good enough. Because I think many of us as adults, when we look back, we can see that and we can know that. The problem being is we don't feel that. So to feel that, we have to work on completions of those response cycles so we can look back and feel and know that it was never any reflection of us ever.
Which is very important for people because they walk around with so much shame.
It is, absolutely. I think we hide so much when we're in shame. And then, I think for many of us, we end up being stuck in freeze or functional freeze because we are still functioning. And for
Mm-hmm.
many, then we might have explosive moments of anger with that. And then we feel the shame of the anger. So we
Mm-hmm.
suppress that back down and go back to freeze again. But it's a very socially acceptable survival response because we're still functioning.
Right. And society likes that. So they don't
Correct.
really,
We're
yeah,
not rocking the boat.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, and also the work that you've done, as you mentioned, you will stop intergenerational trauma. You do it for
Absolutely.
your kids too.
100%. And I think that's the beauty of it. When I look at my children now, they
Mhm.
know more than I did in my 40s,
Mhm.
they really, really do. And I think that's what's super special, thinking they're so kind and compassionate human beings, but they have rock solid boundaries as well.
Mhm.
They know their worth. They know they are worthy just for being who they are, not for something that they have to do or have
Mhm.
done.
And I want to also state that you can undo or the damage that we may have done earlier when we weren't so insightful or enlightened.
Right. Yeah, it's about conversation and compassion,
Mhm.
isn't it? And, that's why I love parts language in all of this too, because I think it enables people, you can go back and say, that part of me that might have shouted at you was doing that because there was a part of me that was feeling like a really rubbish mum at the time. And I'm
Mhm.
really sorry. And there can
Mhm.
be a lot of repair of many ruptures that we have had in that scenario. And I think that's the beautiful thing that when we start to do this work, we can have really honest and vulnerable conversations with
Mhm.
people about our own actions without feeling defensive about them because they're coming from a place of understanding the wounded younger parts of us that showed up in those situations.
And you're also teaching your children that they can make mistakes. You're teaching them that, to love that part of, you're teaching a lot when you're doing that, and it's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think my children certainly know I'm not perfect. They've seen me cry, they've seen me be angry, but they've always seen me take ownership as well and apologize, and not the apology of I'm sorry, but owning my actions, owning all of those things. And I think that means we're all able to have hard conversations with each other with love without getting defensive.
Mhm. So if you would look back and talk to your 10-year-old self and then talk to your 35-year-old self, what would you say?
I'd say, do you know what? You mattered and you were good enough all along without having to do or be anything other than you.
Hmm. Which is huge.
It is huge. It is because I was definitely a human doing, not a human being.
Oh, I never heard that. I like
Yeah,
that.
everything was about doing something.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
so now that you don't have to be a human doing, can you relax? Does it come up where and then,
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm very,
Hmm.
very conscious. Again, having done sort of my somatic experiencing training for 3 years, I'm very good at tracking my own sensations. I'm very good at knowing what my capacity is when it's starting to feel stretched. And I'm knowing I need to pause and allow whatever needs to come. And I think I've just really learnt the innate wisdom of our body that if we listen to the whispers, it doesn't shout as much.
Hmm.
And it's being really in a tune with all of that. So, yeah, rest. I think I always used to think if you were resting, that was selfish, or you could have been doing something else and it was time out of your day. So, doing nothing is still doing something because your nervous system needs time to settle and process and
Hmm.
integrate.
Hmm. And I know we touched on this, but just so everyone else understands, there's functional freeze. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's probably the most socially acceptable trauma response, and especially for women as well. I
Good
think when
point.
we've been often brought up in quite a patriarchal society as well, functional freeze, we're still functioning, but we're very dissociated, we're very disconnected and numb to our own emotions and feelings, and we feel like for many of us how we've been brought up, if we speak our truth or if we say something we'll get shut down or something bad will happen. That's what we've learned.
Mhm.
um, so functional freeze is really a survival response many people live in, where we are numb inside. And I think this is where we come back to the sensations and noticing, if you think about someone who is, say, anxious and depressed, anxiety from a sensation, they're going to have a lot of wired sensations in the body, a rapid heart rate, maybe pins and needles. The sensation really tells us why it is anxiety as such. And then,
Mhm.
like a depression piece, is there's a numbness, there's a disconnect. Feeling nothing is still feeling something, numbness is still a feeling. And I think that freezes, we're still functioning on the outside, but on the inside, we're very dissociated and disconnected. It feels like we're doing the do, but we're not feeling joy. We're not feeling the world. We've lost that sense of aliveness. We're just functioning on a day-to-day basis. And the problem with long-term functional freeze is this is when we start to see chronic illnesses, autoimmune conditions, digestive issues, endocrine disorders. That's then when we start to see the physical element of people who've been living in these prolonged survival responses long after maybe a threat has gone.
Hmm. And as I, mentioned before, society kind of likes, as long as they don't see the mess, they're okay
Correct.
with it. Families are
Absolutely.
okay with it, as long as they don't
Exactly.
see
And I
the
think
mess.
many families are like that, aren't they? They're sort of
I do.
the sort of dysfunction of stick it under the rug, let's pretend it didn't happen, let's just carry on. The problem
Absolutely.
with that, there's never any resolution then, and everybody's just in these survival
Hmm.
responses until something gives. Your body will shout at some point, something
Hmm.
will give.
And I think if you talk to back a little bit with the narcissistic relationships, I think if you talk to many people who were in certainly long-term narcissistic relationships, their body, there's all kinds of illnesses that show up.
Absolutely. But they don't equate that. No doctor or healthcare provider, if you go in and get diagnosed with a healthcare condition like an autoimmune disorder, your
Mhm.
doctor doesn't say, what's your relationship like at home? They just
Mhm.
give you a diagnosis. They'll give you a diagnosis. They'll give you symptom management of your diagnosis and perhaps some medication. But they
Mhm.
don't look at, hey, why is this woman, man in this state?
Mhm.
Why is it their immune system has shut down for
Mhm.
this disorder? And that's another thing, should we be calling things disorders or
You know,
responses? you
it's a
know uh,
response.
yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think there was I think I remember listening to Gabor Mate on the Diary of CEO podcast, and he was saying 80% of autoimmune disorders are in female people pleasers because we're suppressing our
Yeah.
own voice, we're living in survival. And this made
Mhm.
so much sense to me because of
Mhm.
my mum with rheumatoid arthritis. It just was like, it made so much sense. And actually, one of the reasons I trained in internal family systems was because it's evidence based. And at the point was one of the first pieces of scientific research they did was treating rheumatoid arthritis as a protector part. And they noticed really, really good results with that.
Mhm.
So that's what really piqued my interest in how
Mhm.
can rheumatoid arthritis be a protector part? But when I think of my mom, if she's focused on her pain of her rheumatoid arthritis, it's a great distractor from the pain of not feeling good enough from her father and then being in the relationship with my father. I get it now. I get her system did a beautiful job of that. The
Mhm.
sadness is I wasn't there to be able to help and support her with that. And obviously, as rheumatoid arthritis goes on, it does start to, disintegrate your joints as such. So she had it really badly over the years. But if she'd have got a diagnosis in her early 30s and understood somatic work, trauma healing, as we now do, we might be able to stave things off or at least turn the volume down on the pain and the progression of that.
Yeah. So you can dedicate that work to her.
Absolutely. When I wrote my book, actually, I definitely believe, and I know, I mean, I'm very science based, and this
Mhm.
might sound a bit woo woo then to some people, but I believe my mum passed away when she did because I was still with my husband at the time.
Mhm.
Because then when we split up, I felt I had nobody to help and support me. Now, if
Mhm.
my mum had been alive at that time, she'd have mollycoddled me, she'd have been old
Mhm.
Caroline, and I'd have probably been like, oh, mum, all of this. I
Mhm.
didn't have anyone to do that. I literally hit rock bottom,
Mhm.
literally hit rock bottom because nobody was there to pick me up. I had to
Mhm.
literally pick myself up. So I genuinely believe my mum passed away. For me then to go through this and have to do this work myself and pick myself
Mhm.
up, to then go and help thousands of other women in
Mhm.
this situation. And I genuinely believe my mom has unlocked healing for many others
Mhm.
because of the chronological order. It was too
Mhm.
young. She was only 67, and I miss her every day and her seeing, her wonderful grandchildren grow up. But from a sort of perspective of
Mhm.
helping others, because if she'd still been alive and I'd split up from my husband,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right
Yeah.
now. I absolutely, because I'd have
Mhm.
still been childlike. She'd have been the one looking after me.
Mhm.
But because she wasn't there, I
Mhm.
had to do that work and look after me.
Mhm. I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you would like to share before we close?
And I think like you've said there, I think sometimes we can feel like we're looking down a long dark tunnel and there's no light at the end of it. And I think then it's, seeking out those you're surrounding yourself with, seeking out support. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I
Mhm.
have my book, I have a free group people can come and join. So don't be alone in all of this. You don't need to be alone. There are other people who get it, who
Mhm.
understand it, but also, time alone does not make this disappear. I think sometimes we think, I'll be okay in a year. And you might feel okay because your external surroundings may have changed. but that core wound is still going to be there. Do the nervous system work, because genuinely, when you do that work, it is life-changing.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that you do for so many people. And yes, you have helped thousands, but those thousands helped other people too. So truly, it's just, it's all connected, and you're definitely
Absolutely.
leaving the world a better place
Yeah. Well, thank you. And ditto for you as well. Absolutely.
with your mother's help.
Absolutely. She's linking arms with me.
She's linking
Absolutely.
arms.
Yeah,
Thank,
definitely.
thank you.
Thank you for having me.
If you're interested in learning more about Your Traitor Within, grab the journal. Visit www.jessicaannpressler.com for more.